Dr. Hughes, what, if anything, did Dr. Cowan say to you about any type of diagnoses of personality disorders?
Dr. Cowan did not diagnose Ms. Heard with any personality disorder.
And what, if anything, did Dr. Bonnie Jacobs say about diagnosing Amber Heard with any personality disorders?
And Dr. Jacobs similarly did not diagnose Ms. Heard with any personality disorder.
Thank you. Now, let's turn back to intimate partner violence. What types of physical violence were reported to you?
So there were a number of physically violent behaviors that were reported, that Ms. Heard reported that Mr. Depp perpetrated. He pushed her, he shoved her, he slapped her with the front of his hand and the back of his hand. He choked her, he slammed her into the wall, he pushed her and she fell down. He kicked her in the back. Again, without looking at my notes, that's what I can recall.
Okay. And what type of injuries did Amber Heard report to you?
She reported mostly bruising, pain, some cuts. She reported vaginal pain from some of the sexual assaults. She reported that she did have some scratches and cuts on her from broken glass. She reported that she believed she may have lost consciousness 2 times, once in the Australia incident and once in the December 15th, 2015 incident.
Okay. What type of coercive control was reported or did you find?
Leading.
Sustained.
What, if any, coercive control was reported to you?
So the coercive control that was determined in this relationship I found to be quite significant. There were many, many instances where Mr. Depp tried to control how Ms. Heard went about her career. He didn't want her to show nudity. He didn't want her to show boob. He didn't want her to act with certain actors because of this obsessive jealousy. He criticized her ambition. He'd rather she not work. He called, the ambition as something as a negative thing. It made her very fearful to have to look at scripts or talk about scripts or talk about movie roles because he persistently put those down and told her she didn't need to work and she didn't need to do that and she didn't need to show her tits and ass. He didn't necessarily support her work. The way this manifested as well is that he called almost every actor that she had to work with. Males and females. So no matter what show she was filming or shooting, he would call the leading actor. He would call the director. He would tell you, I got eyes down there. I got eyes down on the set. So she never felt safe to be herself and be an actress in these films or productions because she'd have to come home and then endure his anger at her for doing something or for not doing something. When she was filming and he was in the same town, she feared that he would show up on the set and, to know what her call sheet, what she was filming that day. She, even told her assistant, don't give it to him, don't let him see it so that he won't show up. And sometimes he did. So it was very trepidatious for her and very anxiety provoking that he continued to do this. He tried to control what she wore. When she was going out with him, things were fine, but he told her often, no woman like mine is going to dress like a whore, and didn't want her to wear revealing clothing, or revealing clothing according to him. She recalled an incident when she was going on a job audition, and he said, you're going to go out with those tits and ass? And she had to sort of go in and put on what she said, mom jeans, so that she didn't look sexy, so she didn't look revealing, and continue to try to plead with him about what jobs she could take and she could not take. This made her be very sort of restrictive and try to conceal things. She would hide her scripts because she couldn't read them in front of him because he would put them down or want to see where there might be nudity, where there might be something where she's doing a love scene. And then almost every person that she was in a film with, there would be those barrages of the consistent accusations of infidelity. And we saw that on the Australia pictures, the Billy Bob. He was one person that he continued, to berate her about having an affair with. That's what obsessive control looks like, those messages on the mirror. When you look at how he wanted her to there was some interference with the family, with her sister, when some things were leaked, he was obsessed believing that it was Whitney who did it, and eventually Miss Heard had to succumb and say, okay, yes, it was, and then alienate herself from her sister because she just couldn't take the fights anymore. She just couldn't take the constant barrage of criticism. So there were many instances when, in terms of their interactions, she would have to text him right back, but when she would text him, he could not answer for days. And it's this sort of, when we talk about, the ghosting, but your husband doesn't ghost you, your partner doesn't ghost you. And there were so many times of this sort of withdrawal of affection, which was on his terms and when he wanted to do it. I'm aware that there is, testimony in this case that, Mr. Depp decided to leave because he didn't want to be violent. And I do think that's true sometimes. I think he did leave in times where he didn't want an altercation. He did leave after an altercation. He did leave and then came back and continued the altercation. So leaving wasn't the defining variable. The problem was that, with this obsessiveness and this perseveration that he had, the fight would always come back. So leaving might end the argument for that moment, but Ms. Heard knew he was always going to come back, and he was going to, start the interrogation once again.
And what is the effect of the coercive control on Amber Heard?
I mean, the effect was drastic. She talked to me that her roles consistently dropped over the time that she was in the relationship with Mr. Depp, just because it was so difficult to go on auditions, to want to be in a different location with him. Whenever she was not on location with him, it was very stressful. It was very anxiety-provoking because of the accusations of infidelity. We heard that through Isaac Baruch's testimony when she called and was saying, babe, there's no one here, there's no one here. That was something that she had to do repeatedly and constantly over the course of the relationship. So it caused a significant amount of anxiety, of distress, of having to try to conceal and maneuver around him to try to have the career that she wanted to have. It made her hypervigilant, and definitely contributed to sort of her psychological symptomatology getting worse over time.
What about sexual violence?
So there was a number of incidents of sexual violence reported in this relationship. Those are documented early on in Dr. Bonnie Jacobs' notes, where when Mr. Depp was drunk or high, he threw her on the bed, ripped off her nightgown, and tried to have sex with her. There were times when he forced her to give him oral sex when he was angry. These weren't in loving moments. These were angry moments, moments of dominance, moments of him trying to get control over her. There was a time when they were in Hicksville in the trailer, I don't want to say trailer park, but I guess there's trailer park. It is a trailer park, where he was accusing her of a woman hitting on Amber, and that was the problem. Amber got accused of women hitting on her, and it got accused of men hitting on her. So there were so many targets that came through in his obsessive jealousy. But when he, on that incident when Kelly Sue was accused of hitting on Miss Heard, and they went back into the trailer, Mr. Depp performed a cavity search and ostensibly was looking for drugs and felt it acceptable to rip off her nightgown and stick his fingers up her vagina to look for cocaine, thought that maybe she was hiding them there. And again, these incidents often happened in a drug-fueled rage. There was another incident in the Bahamas where when he got angry, he took his fingers and he put them in her vagina and moved her around violently in the closet. Again, an act of sexual violence. And of course, the incident in Australia was one of the most severe instances of sexual violence that Miss Heard had to endure, in which when he was beating her and choking her and telling her, I'm going to fucking kill you, I hate you, I'm going to fucking kill you, and he grabbed a bottle that was on the bar and penetrated her with that bottle. And Miss Heard reported to me of dissociating and going outside of her body, and the only thing she was thinking is, oh God, I hope it's not the broken one.
What, if any, psychological abuse did you find?
There was a number of psychologically abusive behaviors. As I stated, Ms. Hurd admitted to me and reported that she engaged in those behaviors as well. She reported that she did call him names and offensive comments and said things to him that were horrible, and that she was incredibly saddened and horrified by her behavior. And looking back, she, at this point, not being in the constant barrage of abuse, does not recognize her. The abuse by Mr. Depp, he called her a number of names, frequently whore, slut, cunt, lesbian camp counselor, easy, ambition. Ambition was a weaponized term in that relationship. So he called her a lot of names and humiliated her. And of course, I think we talked about the intimidation tactics that, Mr. Depp was often banging and throwing and hitting things in the household, which sort of got the tension to rise up very significantly, very quickly.
Can you tell me how you conducted your analysis to arrive at these conclusions?
Sure. So what I did was look at the incidents that were reported and look at the corroborating data around it. So as we stated, most of these incidents of intimate partner violence happen behind closed doors. Not everyone is going to witness what the parties are reporting behind closed doors. So you look at what is the data that surrounds it. Is there any data before it? Is there any data after it? Is the victim telling somebody in real time about what's happening? Are there therapy notes? Are there pictures? Are there text messages that sort of allow us to fill in the pieces of the picture, even though we don't have exactly what happened at that moment? The more collateral that we have and the consistency across those data points, it gives us greater confidence in our results.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. So
Vague.
Overruled all that.
So, for example, the Boston plane incident, I believe, without looking, I know May 24th, 2014. This is the incident where Ms. Hurd and Mr. Depp were going to fly back to LA and spend the weekend together. They were shooting at different sites. Ms. Hurd is on the plane waiting for Mr. Depp to come on in the tarmac. He's reportedly sitting in the SUV, smoking weed and drinking. She is filming with James Franco at this point, and she gets on the plane and he starts talking about James Franco, making a lot of derogatory comments about her, and I hope you had fun with your escapades, and some more inflammatory language. And then in an argument, when she got up to leave, he kicked her in the back and she went forward on the plane. To the front of the plane, because he sat in the back of the plane. So if I look at what is the corresponding data to this, there's a therapy note, several notes in Bonnie Jacobs' records that talk about Mr. Depp's increasing use of alcohol and his obsessive jealousy around James Franco before this Boston plane incident. After the incident, Ms. Hurd told her friend Io, she told her friend Savannah, she told her friend Rocky. Ms. Hurd did not go home. She was afraid to go home. So she went to a hotel, because when Johnny was in these states, he would often show up because he's still in that drinking and drugging phase. And he talked about that. That was the roxicodone before he detoxed. He was still in that, high substance abuse phase, that he would often show up at night, and that did not feel safe. There was a text from Stephen Duders, Mr. Depp's assistant.
All right. You want to approach?
All right, so, Dr. Hughes, let's go past that text and talk about, go past that text and continue after that text.
Sure. So there was, Mr. Depp apologized to Ms. Heard for that incident. Mr. Depp said in his UK testimony, well, I only maybe playfully tapped her on the back with my foot. Mr. Depp texted Paul Bettany and talked about how he was so drunk and out of control and engaged in bad behavior. He texted his friend Patty Smith a very similar type of text about how drunk and out of control he was. And then finally, Amber Heard wrote an email talking about how distressed and heartbroken she was.
Objection, hearsay.
I mean, I don't agree.
I know. Sustained. I'll sustain the objection. Next question.
All right. Can you give another example?
I think those are all I can remember at this point.
Okay. What if any, sorry, I'm going to have to go a little bit further here. So you concluded that Amber Heard used psychological abuse and some reactive physical violence, I think I heard you say. Is that correct?
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
Can you please explain to the jury what you meant by that?
Yes, that is correct. That, Amber Heard reported to me some of the behaviors that she used that were psychologically aggressive, the name calling, the putting him down and calling him very bad names and insulting his fatherhood. And she was very shamed and remorseful about that. She also indicated, using, and as some of the testing showed, minor forms of violence, pushing, shoving, throwing objects. We see that a lot with women when there's not proportional force. Women are more likely to throw objects. And then the more severe act of punching him, which a punch falls in the more severe category. And the context, as she explained it, was that he was coming after Whitney, and she stood, her sister, and she stood in the way and she punched him.
Now, does that make Amber Heard a perpetrator of intimate partner violence?
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
So that was one of the tasks that I had to consider. That was one of the hypotheses that I had to consider. And given all of the other data, that was not my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Now, you stated that you read a number of therapy records. Please tell the jury, why are therapy records important?
Therapy records are critical for a forensic psychologist. When we have the opportunity to go back in time and see what a person was dealing with, what the content of their distress was, and what the symptoms of their distress was, it really gives us a snapshot in time. So they become very critical as part of the overall forensic psychological evaluation, because we as psychologists understand how people sort of treat in therapy and what to look for. So in looking back at Ms. Heard's therapy records, we see sort of real-time unfolding of this dynamic in this relationship. We see early on in her notes in her report with Bonnie Jacobs and in Dr. Bonnie Jacobs' notes, reports of constant concerns about Mr. Depp's substance abuse, constant concerns about him passing out and vomiting, constant concerns about not wanting to—
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
She can characterize that and say she relied on that.
Overruled.
Thank you. Please continue.
Constant concerns about how do I get him into treatment? How do I get him help? Ms. Heard starts going to Al-Anon at this point, early 2012, in the beginning of the relationship, because she has to figure out and wants to figure out a way to support the man that she's dating right now and the man who she's falling madly in love with. There were reports in Dr. Jacobs' notes early on about his controlling behavior, about his jealousy behavior, about him not wanting to do certain jobs, of not wanting her to wear certain clothes. So this is going back to 2012. With no indication of why would she be saying that, but for the sole purpose of trying to get help and trying to get guidance in this relationship that she finds so difficult. There are indications, as I mentioned before, of the sexual assault and the sexual abuse, and how he would, you know, when he was angry and when he was drunk, it was mostly drug and alcohol fueled rage when he would, you know, throw her on the bed and try to have sex with her. And then, you know, if he was not able to perform, he would get more angry at her and blame her. So we have this dynamic of blaming her for his inability to take responsibility for his behavior. Those themes were throughout Dr. Jacobs' notes.
Did Dr. Jacobs assign any diagnoses to Amber Heard?
She did early on.